Gender-neutral toy sections are coming to California retail stores. Dr. Jack Turbin is with Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at Stanford Children's Health. First, can you tell us about this new state law and how it's designed to challenge stereotypes?
Yeah, so what the law requires is that any retailer that has more than 500 employees is going to be required to have a gender-neutral toy section. So a section that's not just marketed as being for boys or just marketed for being for girls.
And why would you say toys are so powerful when it comes to reinforcing gender stereotypes?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons that this is important. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that this isn't something new. So retailers have already been doing this for a while. And really the law is probably largely symbolic. The fine is only $250 for the first offense. So you can imagine if you're a company with over 500 employees, that's not a huge financial penalty. But it does point out to this trend that we're seeing, where more and more research is showing us that having gender-specific toys creates a lot of problems. First is that it reinforces stereotypes that can be damaging to some children, right? So this idea that only toys about science and medicine are for boys, and obviously that is not the case, or that toys that develop emotional skills or nurturing skills should only be for girls. But really, we want all kids to have those skills. Right? So we want all kids to have the visual spatial learning skills they might get from Legos. That's vital to their development. We want both boys and girls to develop skills like nurturing and emotional understanding. So the hope is that this move will make sure that kids are getting this full repertoire of skills that they need, because we think of toys as being right, frivolous and just fun, but in reality, they're actually really important for a kid's development and cognitive and emotional development. And the last thing I'll say that's really important about this law is that we're seeing more and more research showing that if you force kids into a gender box, that can really hurt their mental health, especially boys. So what we see is that boys are told that they can't express any feminine interests. And so a boy may be afraid to go take a toy from the girl section that they really enjoy. But that can lead to a lot of shame and anxiety if they're told that they can't do that. And the mental health problems from that are surprisingly dramatic when we look at the research.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. How harmful can it be for children to feel pressure to conform to gender stereotypes?
Yeah, right. We talk a lot about this for transgender kids, and certainly we see higher rates of anxiety, depression, suicide attempts whenever they're not accepted, right? If their family refuses to accept their gender identity, if their peers refuse to accept them. But it's important to keep in mind that this isn't just about transgender kids. So there are plenty of cisgender kids who have interests that generally someone might think of as gender nonconforming. But in the same way, right, if there's a little boy who's cisgender who likes playing with dolls, and people make a huge deal out of it and tell them they can't, that can, in the same way, instill some shame and even like self-hatred, self-esteem issues that drive similar anxiety to what we see for transgender kids who go through similar things.
And critics say this new law goes too far and violates free speech. What would be your response to that?
I would say it's an interesting hill to die on, to be honest. It's really not that radical of a law. So it's not even telling the stores that they can't have a boys and girls section. They still can. They just also need to have this gender neutral toy section. And again, it's only applying to these large retailers that have more than 500 employees. The financial penalty is very low. So if anybody really didn't want to follow this, they likely just wouldn't and pay the relatively small fine. But outside of that, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment on what potential challenges might come up. But I see this really as a benign law that I think the only change we might see is that kids might feel a little bit more comfortable and less judged and shamed if they have interests that aren't what we expect for their gender.
And as you pointed out, the new law does not get rid of boys and girls sections entirely and doesn't include clothing. Would you say this law goes far enough, just based on your experience?
I live in the Bay Area, so we already have a lot of this going on, which I think to the critics, it points out that this isn't something that creates huge problems, having these gender neutral sections. I'll say a lot of retailers are doing it in other areas besides toys anyway, separate from the legislation. So Target, for instance, is already working on building more gender neutral clothing sections. So whether the law goes far enough or doesn't go far enough, it almost doesn't matter from my perspective, because I think this is something we're going to see happening regardless.
Yeah. Well, we do appreciate your take on this. Dr. Jack Turbin with Stanford Children's Health, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.